I'm Betsy Thompson, and thanks for joining us today. I'd like to invite you to join us on a series of 10 lessons on overcoming codependent behaviors and other dysfunctional behaviors. This will be a faith and values approach to this, and I have with me Sharon Brown. Thanks for joining me, Sharon. Okay. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what the series will involve. We will talk about what codependency is in today's lesson, and in the other lessons we will talk about feelings and how important it is to learn to get in touch with your feelings and to learn to recognize your feelings and how to deal with your feelings. We will talk about control and denial and what a big part this plays in codependency and in overcoming codependent behavior. We will talk about the importance of accepting your circumstances, either from your past or your present circumstances, and detachment from things that we have no control over. And we will learn some good ways to learn new boundaries and how important boundaries are, that we must have good boundaries to overcome this. And we will talk about self-love and how to learn to love ourselves so we can give love to other people. And from there comes good, intimate, healthy relationships. And we will end the series on relapse and understanding that relapse is a part of recovery and a very important part of recovery.
Betsy, what is codependency?
Codependency is very hard sometimes to define. It takes a while to get used to it, to understand it, and to fully understand where it came from, what things cause codependency. But basically, it's focusing on other people, places, or things to avoid reality.
Okay, where did the word codependency originate from?
That's a big question that I have not found an answer to. In everything I've read and everybody I've talked to, nobody seems to really know who coined the phrase codependency. And the word codependency is a little bit misleading. But from what I have read and studied, I believe it came out of necessity. If you remember Alcoholics Anonymous, a wonderful group that has helped so many alcoholics deal with alcoholism, came up around in the 30s. And I think it was about in the 50s that the necessity for Al-Anon came, which was to help the families of alcoholics. And shortly after that, Alateen came around because the children of alcoholics were affected. And it was sometime in the late 70s or early 80s that the word codependency came up, because we learned, as we learned more about alcoholism and other addictions, it affected members of the family. It was far more reaching than we realized. And
okay, so does codependency mean that you are addicted to drugs or alcohol?
It could mean that. It mainly means that you are focusing on something to avoid reality. A lot of alcoholics and drug addicts are basically codependent, and that's what they've chosen to numb their pain. There are so many things to become addicted to. The list goes on, and it pretty much ends up with excess of anything, overeating, undereating, overspending, underspending, anything that becomes an obsession.
Okay, so like you're trying to say, if you're in a relationship, if you get into bad relationships over and over again, is that codependency?
That's a good sign of codependency, because you can become addicted to relationships, especially to bad relationships. And in this series, we will learn why that fact is and how that happens and what changes you can make in your life to break that trend. Okay. Codependency is considered an addiction. And the reason it is it thrives on three things that all addictions thrive on, and that's obsession, compulsion, and preoccupation.
Oh, can you explain obsession?
The behavior of codependency becomes an obsession, just like any addiction or an addiction to any drug is. You are obsessed with it. You cannot break the behavior on your own. You need understanding, you need help, and so it becomes an obsession.
Okay, so this is something that you do over and over again.
Right, and probably are not aware that you're doing it. It's a compulsion. You're compelled to do it. It's a force within you driving you to do it that you cannot stop on your own. You're preoccupied with it without even realizing it. You're preoccupied with keeping this behavior going on in your life because it's the only way that you know how to deal right now. And we break all this down where it's easy to understand and easy to learn, and each person individually figures out how they got that way and why they got that way, which helps them to overcome it.
Okay, in your classes, can a person find out whether they're codependency or not?
Absolutely. By the first or second lesson, most people will realize whether they are codependent. In the first lesson, my experience has been in my classes, everybody that comes to the classes are very interested in the subject and find it fascinating and interesting, and you can just hear the buzz go around the room. Everybody knows somebody that's codependent. And everybody says, I've got to get so-and-so to come to this class. Oh, I'm going to take this information home. I'm going to share it with this person or share it with that person. But after the second or the third lesson on control, it's a humbling experience because nearly everybody in the class realizes their own problem with codependency and realize that they need to overcome it themselves before they can help their loved ones with it. As I was reading literature on codependency and studied and learned more about it, there are several very good publications out on it that would be very helpful to anybody that wants more information on it. Every book that I read had a little bit different approach to it, but all of them were basically the same. The information in the books seemed to be tried and tested and seems to be very solid. And I noticed 5 things in all of the publications that I read that seem to be interwoven throughout overcoming codependency. And these 5 things we talk about in depth in the 10 lessons. The 5 things are feelings, control, abandonment, intimacy, and self-love.
Okay, how can you tell if you are a controller?
Well, we will talk about that in the 3rd lesson. It's a very interesting lesson because on the surface you appear to be very uncontrolling. And there are some hidden traits to look for that we're going to talk about. The 5 things that I found to be interwoven in all of the information appear to be unrelated. It seems like you just sort of grabbed them out of the air. But after we learn about them, we find that they're all very, very involved. Control is one of the most important ones that we have to learn about.
Why is it the important one?
Okay, because control is essential to every aspect of a codependent's life. And we think of codependence as being dependent.
Yes.
Dependent on something, someone, which they are. But it takes a lot of controlling to be that dependent. And so it's confusing at first. And once we understand it better, we realize how controlling codependency behavior really is. Sometimes the control is total lack of control of your life. You may totally turn control of your life over to another person or another thing, an addiction. Or it may be you have become very controlling by becoming a caretaker, a caregiver, and you spend your whole life taking care of other people and taking other people's problems on as your own, and that takes a lot of control to keep all that going.
But aren't we taught to take care of other people?
Yes, we are. We are predisposed to codependency, and unless we understand the importance of caring for other people, but not taking total care of their lives and their problems, then we get into codependent behavior. And we will talk more about that later too, where we can understand it better.
Okay.
And we will talk about the verses from the Bible that teach us to care for other people, and we will learn how to do it in a biblical way.
Okay.
With feelings, Codependents are usually very emotional people, very caring, very giving people, but totally out of touch of with their own feelings. And what happens, they focus on other people's problems, rather than their own problems, spend their life solving other people's problems.
So you're saying that they can't feel their own feelings?
They have learned to shut down their own feelings. Usually it's because it is so painful to feel their own feelings. And let me back up from there. Usually it's a child, if they came from a dysfunctional childhood, they have not learned how to feel their feelings.
Okay, what is a dysfunctional family or childhood, or what? I've heard that word before.
Okay, a dysfunctional family is a family in which the family members are not allowed to feel their feelings because they're in denial about the problems in that family. You will usually find this in families of alcoholics or drug addicts, or possibly rageaholics, religioholics, anything to excess like that. And the difference in a dysfunctional family and a healthy family is, of course, first of all, we know there are no perfect families. There are healthy and unhealthy families. In healthy families, problems are acknowledged, they're addressed, the family members get together, they talk about the problems, they talk about their feelings about the problems.
Oh, so you're saying in a codependency person's family that they don't discuss problems?
Right.
Okay.
It's sort of a family secret. We don't tell anybody about this. This is a family thing.
Okay.
And it prevents it prevents the family members from sharing with each other what the problem is doing to them in their lives. And when they grow up and leave that family, they continue to address their problems in that way. And they come out of a family with these mixed messages: don't feel your feelings, they're not important, stuff your feelings, pretend like everything is fine.
Okay.
And this is some of the roots of codependent behavior. One of the other 5 things was abandonment. I was just amazed in all the different authors and all the different publications how abandonment played such a big role in codependent behavior. This is not rejection. Nobody likes rejection. Rejection hurts. That's something all of us would avoid if we could. But this is the terror of abandonment. It's the feeling that if you are alone, that you would die from the pain of abandonment. And this is where bad relationships come into play. Most codependents will hook up with anybody to avoid being alone. And it's because of that terror of abandonment that is instilled deep inside of them.
Can you explain what caused this terror?
Well, usually something from your childhood will trigger that. There's an awful lot of abandonment in dysfunctional families. You can see it very easily in families of alcoholics and drug addicts because it's not unusual for them to disappear for days at a time. And of course that instills a fear of abandonment in children. However, even when the parent is not physically gone and they're not there emotionally, they may get so caught up in the crisis of the dysfunction in the family that the children feel abandoned, and they grow up with this feeling of abandonment. And so their ways of trying to overcome it are to hook on to anybody to not feel abandonment.
Okay, so they feel like they have no one that they can call upon, like your parents are supposed to be there to support you?
Well, they have a problem with intimacy with people, and that's the next thing that we deal with, which is intimacy, because when you come from a childhood like that, you don't know how to be intimate with people. You don't know what intimacy is. There's no way that you could know. Codependents are usually totally incapable of initiating or maintaining healthy, intimate relationships because, first of all, they're out of touch with their feelings. so we really learn how to get in touch with our feelings. And then they have no real self-esteem or self-love. You can't have intimacy with other people until you have a basic self-love for yourself. And usually they'll do anything to avoid rejection, and are not even in reality about this behavior and that this fact exists with themselves. And we talk about all of that in these lessons.
Okay.
And then with self-love, codependents have never developed a basic self-love for themselves that would perpetuate self-care and self-preservation. And so it's impossible for them to have really healthy, intimate relationships.
Okay. What type of people tend to become codependency?
It's almost without exception adult children of alcoholics, adult children of drug addicts, basically adult children of dysfunctional homes. In her book, Choice Making by Sharon Cruz, she states that codependency follows alcoholism like night follows day. In other words, if you came from an addictive home, you are going to have some codependency traits. It's almost normal. And she also calls codependency a normal response to an abnormal situation. So I think the word codependency and the whole concept of codependency came out of necessity. I think as we learned more and more about addictions and how to overcome them and how to have happy lives in spite of addictions and addictive homes, I think codependency was just a step further in that, a very healthy one. And I think did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
that did. That took care.
Okay. Some other things that we are going to talk about in this series is how important it is to get in touch with a higher power, how important it is to turn your life over to God, how important it is to let go of all this controlling and finally let God step in and start controlling your life. And once you've done that, once you've turned your will over to God, then everything that's happened to you in your past is not lost, is not for no reason, but there can be a divine purpose for it. God can turn everything around to good for us. Without God in our life, a lot of the things that have happened to us would have no meaning, and there would be no reason for some of the tragedies that we've gone through. And let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of codependency on page 5. There are probably hundreds of characteristics of codependency, and there's many, many charts that are going around that people can read and ask themselves, do I have this trait, do I have that trait? And some of them are, do I often feel isolated and afraid of people, especially authority figures? Do I feel overly frightened of angry people and personal criticism? Do I often feel I'm a victim in personal and career relationships?
Okay, well, why would they feel that they are a victim in a personal or career relationship?
Okay, well, as you read down these, first of all, on the surface, almost everybody has these feelings, at least sometime or another. And the difference in them and in a codependent who has these feelings is, in a codependent, these feelings are exaggerated. For instance, the first one, do I often feel afraid of people, especially authority figures? Everybody feels afraid of people in some circumstances,
Yes,
at some
that's
time.
true.
And authority figures can make you feel very afraid.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
for a codependent, it's not the person in that authority position, but it's maybe just anybody or everybody in an authority position. And that goes back to the authority people in their childhood. And overcoming codependency, you overcome that fear, and you learn to feel a fear at appropriate times with authority figures. Codependents are approval seekers. Almost everybody's an approval seeker. Everybody wants approval, but a codependent will lose their identity in the process. They will
Oh,
sacrifice.
so you saying they try to please other people?
They will do anything to be approved and to get approval and to please people. They will sacrifice personal values. And a non-codependent won't do that because that's unhealthy, that's not having healthy boundaries. And we learn healthy ways of coping in this series. Okay. You ask why they often felt a victim in personal and career relationships. Codependents feel victimized a great deal of the time. It's no wonder because they were probably victimized in their childhood, and because of unhealthy behaviors, they probably have been victimized in their adulthood, and they probably are a victim most of the time. But
this is something that they let happen to themselves.
Without realizing it, they are allowing themselves to become victimized.
Okay.
And so that feeling is really a perfectly normal feeling at this stage, but they can overcome that and learn to not be victims. They have overdeveloped sense of responsibility with other people. If they see someone with a problem, they feel almost compelled to jump in and help that person solve their problems. And that's okay to an extent. But when you sacrifice your whole life to do that, it becomes very unhealthy.
Oh, so that's when the obsession comes in.
That becomes an obsession. And you're compelled to do it, and you become preoccupied with it. Usually, codependents feel guilty when they try to stand up for themselves, but don't have any problem standing up for everybody else. And again, everybody has these feelings at some time or another, but codependents have them in a very exaggerated form. They usually will confuse love with pity. In a childhood where the parent or both parents were addicts, they usually ended up taking care of the parents. Okay. And they felt sorry for their parents and
so
wished
it's
that
like
they could
live
be
in
healthy.
a make-believe world, or what, not facing reality?
Adult children had to live a make-believe world when they were children. Okay. And they pitied their parents, and so love and pity just kind of merge together, and they grow up confusing love with pity, and will tend to get into love relationship with people that they really don't love, but that they feel sorry for. They find it hard to express feelings of joy and happiness. I've heard so many adult children and codependents say, when things are going good, I get depressed, I get sad, I get edgy, I don't know what's coming next. Throughout all of their childhood and maybe even their adulthood up to this point, anytime something good happened, something bad followed it. A crisis was coming. They were never allowed or never taught to enjoy happiness and good times as a child.
This is something that they are expecting, something bad to happen.
Right. They have learned to live in a crisis state of mind, a crisis mode, and they know that any minute something bad's coming.
But that's not necessarily true. They just looking for this to happen.
You know, it could be necessarily true because they draw this kind of people to them, and they draw these kinds of incidents to them, because that's the only thing that feels normal to them. And they have learned that if they're not in the middle of a crisis, they don't feel normal. That's one reason they get so involved in other people and their crises, because that feels normal to them. That's not normal, it's destructive. You can't do that all your life. In time, in adulthood, all that starts breaking down, and that's when people start searching for answers to codependent behavior, even if they don't call it codependency. And you know, we talked about abandonment, and another feeling a lot of codependents have is they often feel abandoned even when things are going good. That feeling of abandonment never leaves them until they figure out where it came from, how to overcome it, how to resolve it. One more thing, codependents tend to react to all of the things in their life. They react to all the incidents in their life, which could even mean overreact. They want to learn to respond. You don't want to become unfeeling and uncaring and unhelpful, but you learn to respond to the incidents in your life instead of react to them.
Okay, so I'm getting to understand what you're
Okay.
saying. Okay.
By the end of the 10 weeks, you have a much better understanding of codependency and how far-reaching it is and how involved it is with everyday behavior. If you are codependent, if you grew up in a dysfunctional childhood, no doubt that if you're an adult and you have children and you have a family, you're using the very same ways of coping in that family. And what we hope to do in this series is help people to break the cycle, to learn new ways of coping, to teach our children how to cope in a healthy way.
So you saying like if I have codependency behaviors that it'll be passed along to my children?
It will absolutely be passed on to them. A lot of codependents grew up and said, I will never allow my children to experience the pain that I did in childhood. And they can't not do it because they don't know any other way to cope. Okay. But they can break that cycle. They can get healthy and they can teach their children, even if their children are adults, they can teach their children new ways of coping.
Okay.
We've just got a few minutes left. I'd like to talk a little bit about the first stages of recovery if anyone wants to overcome codependent behavior. In her book, Choice Making, she talks about 3 very, very important things that I call awareness, education, and overcoming codependency. Those are 2 of the first things you must do, is become aware of it and get educated. And from there, you can choose your own recovery. You usually need help. It may take professional help. It may take help from friends. But whatever you choose, each person's recovery is their own. And if you'd like more information, write to We Are Not Alone, 185 Anthus Drive, Nashville, Tennessee, 37210. Thanks for joining, and I hope you'll join us next time.